It's the first of 4 sessions where it's really about risk. If you're going to think through a kind of fundamental rethink of liberalism for the 21st century, at some level you have to figure out what are the issues that we're worried about, what are the things that are important. And that's really why it makes sense, if you're going to rethink this fundamentally, you start with what are the real risks.
Let me start with some definitions. Risk to a toxicologist, hazard times exposure. Risk to a risk assessor, probability times consequence. What's the likelihood? Quantifiable to some degree, times if it happens, how bad is it? Risk to you and me, and we were just talking about this. This is out of the dictionary. The chance that something bad would happen. So chance is quantifiable to some degree and knowable. Raise your hand if you want to take a shot at the objective true meaning of bad. That's what risk means. There is no objective risk.
So the world has objective risks, yet people's perceptions of risk are subjective. It turns out that there's a long history of how that's played out in politics.
The use of moralistic and perhaps smaller Republican language to discuss the common good or the public interest has been delegitimized in favor of a technocratic, apocalyptic rhetoric. Since we're talking about modernizing liberalism, arguably this shows the success of progressivism, not contemporary center-left, but of the early 1900s, a century ago, when the idea of capital P progressivism was that you could have an apolitical discussion based purely on facts, and all political issues could be divided into problems. In each problem, you would get experts, and they would come to the scientific solution of it. And if you look at the Social Security debate, for example, you see how we go from the moralistic to the technocratic. From the 1930s, when Social Security was created, all the way up until the 1960s, conservatives denounced it on moral and political grounds. It was corrupting the republic, and people were being spendthrifts and they should save. That got nowhere. As various historians have pointed out, in the 1970s they decided, you know, we're going to beat the liberal professors at their own game. So now we're going to say there's a $50 trillion unfunded liability and society will collapse. And we can't afford it, and we have all of these charts and graphs. And I think on issue after issue, you see this, and just the parting thought is, I think this is anti-political and anti-democratic. It's extremely bullying, both the threat inflation and the technocratic rhetoric. Let's look at each one of these. The threat inflation is, we're all going to die, right? You know, where civilization is going to collapse, or children will be kidnapped. When it comes to the method of dealing with this evil that all rational people would agree with needs to be stopped, again, discussion is closed off because the experts have spoken. There's one factual answer. And if you disagree with the expert answer, then you're irrational.
Whoever gets to own the risk discussions gets to own politics in 2 very, very powerful ways. One is on the moral front, and the second is on the front of authoritative claims about what counts as objective reality.
If risk is subjective, then dealing with that risk needs to get worked out through politics and ultimately through policies that get carried out by government. How well that works depends on how much people trust government.
We still particularly use as a measure of badness, David said, you know, how do we get a consensus on this? There is actually one that we end up reverting to all the time, which is the probability of mortality. How many people are going to be killed in the World Trade Center? Turns out it's the same as the monthly road death toll here in the US, or the annual road death toll in the United Kingdom. Nobody ever suggested restructuring the US federal government because of the monthly death toll on America's highways. At least as far as a public policy perspective is concerned, we must be concerned with the process of the social selection of risk.
Actually, what we're talking about is not risk, it is the risk-trust balance. And what Mike Lind was talking about, in my view completely correctly, is that we are living through a rather unusual moment. The climate episode happened to catalyze it, in which we have seen a wholesale destruction of trust in expert knowledge, as far as the general public are concerned. We now have a moment where that balance has been disturbed in a way that makes the acceptance of the mid-20th century, what you call liberal, what on my side of the Atlantic we call socialist, notion of a benign state which can actually accurately identify and then be legitimated. So it's actually all about the legitimation of belief.
I'm astonished at what I've heard so far at the panel this morning. For this reason, the four principal opening presentations and most of the comments would have been perfectly at home and welcomed on John Stossel's Fox News show. You know, for a bunch of liberals, you guys really suck. The idea that an awful lot of risk perception is subjective, I think that's exactly right. However, it seems to me that we ought not to give up on objectivism, or objective reality. Objectivism, excuse me. Strike that.
We should give up on objectivism.
Yes, completely agree. We don't want to give up on objective reality and expertise. I think rightly understood, however you define that.
Every interest group now, there is a tried and true method where you put on your white lab coat, you know, and you're not a doctor or a professor, but you pretend to be one on TV. And you say the world is going to end unless we do this in the next 3 years. It's scientifically proven. So it's not science I'm criticizing, it's scientism.
Are they merely
There was plenty of back and forth debate on how best to deal with the subjective nature of public opinion of risk and outright public fear, including some suggestions on how to objectively understand it.
One of the things I'm finding is that developing countries in general are less worried about GMOs or less worried about nuclear power than an overdeveloped country like Germany. And so is it just that, you know, once you stop being afraid of the real things, you then put all of your effort into being afraid of the unreal things? And the concept of hidden dangers is, you know, really very powerful, because then you can assign the hiddenness of it to various malevolent forces that you like to think are behind everything bad. There's a whole apparatus, a whole anatomy of public fear here that I think you've got a good start on going into one domain. It would be nice just to do the, you know, social science work, sort it all out, and then it's a thing that we can all discuss. Oh, this is, you know, this kind of fear. It's the sort of thing that comes along in this sort of stage of getting from an underdeveloped to an overdeveloped country, and you can talk about it in this objective way that even lets the political process get a hold on it.